Boker Tov, everyone, and I'm here with my brain. This is a wonderful brain that I found at an estate sale, and of course, I just have to add it to my collection of strange memorabilia that I keep in my study. But this is a wonderful brain. You can take it apart and you can look at the different aspects of the brain. And it's always good to think about our brain because our brain has made so much possible. I've heard some describe the brain as the most complex known entity in the universe. And certainly it has allowed us to achieve amazing things. One should never sneeze at the brain and its capacities. It's also the source of some of our self delusions and our worst mistakes. So, the brain is not an unalloyed benefit. It is something that we have to think about and reflect on. And that is really what's going on in our Torah portion also. It's called Eikev. It's the third of our portions in Deuteronomy, or the book of Devarim. And in it, Moses continues to recount all the stories of what happened to us in the 40 years in the wilderness. And then he comes to this remarkable little summa, a little assembly of thoughts that I think is one of the most essential messages in the entire Torah. Yeah, Moses is a little wordy. It takes him a while to get there, but there's some important things being said, and some memorable ways in which he says it. And so let's go through those. So you could take them as a set of guidelines. So summarizing everything that's happened to us in the wilderness and before that, we begin with Moses saying that most Jewish of all things, remember the hardships of the past. All right. And that's incredibly important to do. We need to remember that life has not always been as good or as sweet as it is now, so that we can appreciate what we have. We live in such a materially rich world. Here I am surrounded by all my books and my collectibles and my pictures and my maps and my all my stuff, my brains, and those things may not have even existed in the past. These were not possible in the past. Life was not as rich as it is now, and we always need to remember that, especially at a time when we're struggling with a infectious disease, an epidemic, a pandemic. We need to remember the blessings of certain things that didn't exist before, certain things that didn't exist materially, and certain things that didn't exist conceptually. All right, so let's take the material, of course. Vaccinations. All right. We often fail to understand just how harsh and hard life was before. Inoculations, vaccinations, antibiotics, right? I always tell people that before the 1930s, doctors really couldn't arrest or stop an infectious process at all. All they could do was manage the symptoms. It wasn't until the invention of sulfa drugs and penicillin and all the things that followed that from the 1930s and 40s that we have been able to arrest the effects of infectious disease and turn them around. Remarkable how hard the world was before that. But the same thing is true of inoculations. Inoculations were invented in the 18th century. There may be some evidence that a few very clever physicians figured out certain kinds of inoculations earlier than that, but we generally credit an English physician named Jenner with figuring out how to inoculate against smallpox, one of the most devastating diseases of the time, a disease that probably, because they lacked any sort of native immunity, killed somewhere close to 75 to 80% of Native Americans in the American continent while the colonies were still colonies. Devastating, unbelievably devastating. And Jenner found a way around that. But there are many other diseases that could be inoculated against: whooping cough, diphtheria, um, cholera, and measles. We now chuckle about measles. We chuckled about measles when I was a child, but the fact of the matter was that measles killed hundreds of thousands of people every year. And of course, polio is another example. In the 20th century, went from inoculations to vaccinations. And if we are facing any problem right now, it's that we've forgotten, that we don't remember how hard life was before vaccinations. So this is really a very relevant message right now for us, is to remember the hardships of the past so that we may appreciate the good fortune of today. And of course, this section also includes the very memorable statement, man does not live by bread alone. Humanity does not live by bread alone, but by everything that comes from the mouth of Adonai. In other words, that the world is already ready-made to provide us what we need. We make bread, we plant the seed, we make the bread, but that's not the full scope of life. And the wheat was there before we adapted it. Fruit, animals, all the things that allow us to eat and sustain and live are already here. And God has provided all of these things for us, which we can then build into the things we need. The brain is essential, but in fact, it doesn't provide for everything. All right. And the next part of the message is that God is going to put us in a land that will provide for us. Americans, especially, need to realize just how amazingly fortunate we are that we are in a land that provides for so many of our needs. We span a continent. We live in many different climates. We produce incredible variety of produce and products and things we need. And so we lack for nothing. As the Torah says, you will lack for nothing. And we should celebrate that fact. Okay, so you and I are not as wealthy as Jeff Bezos or Richard Branson, but the fact of the matter is we live like kings of the past. Again, invoking what was once, I always think of King David in his drafty stone palace in Jerusalem, where it rained in the winter and it was hot in the summer, and it was just uncomfortable. My modest 4-bedroom house has so many features that King David would die for: central heating, central air conditioning, carpeting, windows that open and close and seal, good insulation, a roof that doesn't need to be fixed every single year. Oh, wait, did I mention toilets and running water? You know, you didn't have to have an army of servants to haul up your water and then to haul away your poop. We live amazing, palatial, royal lives compared to the royalty of the past. We should never forget that. And then another memorable passage that occurs in this section is where it says, you shall eat, you shall be satisfied, and you shall bless Adonai your God. This is the passage that is the inspiration for the motzi, which we say on a regular basis. And if we observe it, also the longer tradition of the Birkat Hamazon. All right, the blessing for sustenance, which in the Reform version runs about 90 seconds, and in the Orthodox version runs about 5 minutes. But in any case, it is a laundry list of the things we are thankful for, and to remind ourselves that we live in a good land, and we are very fortunate. Number three is the message. Guideline three from Moses is the message that having built fine houses, having increased our herds, having added to our number of automobiles, to our retirement accounts, to our 401ks, to our investments, don't grow haughty in heart. I think that's a common disease, especially in America. We think we invented all of this ourselves, or more specifically, I think I am the total master of my own destiny. You think that you are fully a self made man. It's not true. It's not even true if you give it a minute's thought. I didn't educate myself. Systems were put in place long before me to provide for my education, for my upbringing, tools, schools, universities, roads, communication, um, food supplies. I can't grow my own food. I don't think you can either. I mean, you can grow a limited amount of it, but we simply cannot sustain ourselves by ourselves. So don't get arrogant about how powerful you are, because our power stands on a pyramid of other people's work, and it could fall away at any moment. We have discovered in the time of our pandemic that supply systems falter, that things we want and need or think we need, we can't get. Just to give you a simple example, during the crisis, Robin and I thought it would be a good idea to get ourselves a nice freezer to put in the garage so that we could stock up on things that we needed during the pandemic. There were some, everybody else had that same idea. We had to wait several months to get a freezer. And we actually did fine without having that freezer. But as it turns out, we are not self-sustaining. We are not able to simply do everything we need to do for ourselves. We are dependent. We are dependent on our fellow human beings. We are dependent on God. We need to not be arrogant. And then the final message that Moses adds, and this also is something that our brains trap us into, is that we somehow equate the idea that if we are successful, we are virtuous, that the universe rewards being a good person by providing us with bounty in response to our goodness. And that's not the case. We know that many good people suffer, are afflicted with illness, have economic ill fortune, and do not thrive. We also know many examples of real momsers who go on to be incredibly successful. I think of the Pharma Bro, that somebody who I've never met in life, but every time I saw him on the TV, I wanted to punch him in the face. People, arrogant people, self-satisfied people who think that their success equates to virtue. And God tells us that is not the case. Don't assume that you have achieved what you have achieved because you deserve it, or that you're entitled to it, or that there's something special about you. And this comes back to our American sense of exceptionalism. Somehow America deserves everything that's happened in the past and is happening now. And we then get into a weird loop of thinking about why are we being punished when things go wrong. We're not. The world doesn't work that way. God did not set up the world that it automatically rewards virtue and automatically punishes error. The Torah portion tells us that. If we are successful, it's because partly our own effort, but also a kind of providence, a kind of divine favor that we don't necessarily deserve. You know, God declares us Am Segula, which is erroneously translated as a chosen people. Um, it means something more like a treasured people. Why do I treasure my brain? All right. I love my brain. But what is it? It's just a lump of plastic. It's been painted. There's nothing special about this, nothing extraordinary about it, but I have formed an attachment to it and I love it. And apparently, God has done the same thing. Though we are but dust and ashes, God has selected us as a people to communicate to the world about the most important values in life. We didn't earn it, we don't deserve it, but it is our glory to be doing this. So we should rejoice in our good fortune, remember our past struggles, not become arrogant, and not assume a false virtue that we really don't deserve. If we think about that, that's a whole program for living life. And hopefully it inspires all of us to walk humbly through the world with our God. Shavua Tov, a good week, everybody. And I look forward to talking with you next week when we have our next Taste of Torah.